The fluorescent light in the restaurant bathroom flickered like a warning light. "You will do exactly what I say, little girl," the manager snarled. The words spat close enough to sting. Jasmine Carter looked at him for a long beat, then simply said, "No." She was 29, a black waitress who smiled at tables and took orders with the practiced ease of someone who knew the rhythm of other people's nights. To most patrons, she was invisible. To the staff, she was dependable. To the manager, she was a problem that would be handled. What he did not know was that Jasmine carried more than a pad of tips under her arm. She carried a steady, deliberate plan and a recording app in her pocket, and she had learned how to translate humiliation into proof. The hand that grabbed her arm in that cramped bathroom was the first raw, visible piece of a pattern. The hand that did not expect to be filmed belonged to Tom Reed, the floor manager. The man standing in the doorway, pretending not to watch, was Vincent Bell, Jasmine's husband, a name whispered in a different register, a man with history that made people lower their voices. That night, the collision of a public insult and private power became the first page of a dossier that would grow into an investigation, an operation, and a sentence. If you want to see how a recorded apology became evidence in a federal inquiry, stay with us. Now we go back to the evening the bathroom door closed and reveal each piece that followed. The escalation did not arrive as a single explosion. It was a sequence of small violences arranged like beads on a string. Tom Reed mocked Jasmine in front of guests, brushed his hand too insistently when clearing plates, assigned him double shifts without notice, and questioned her competence in front of trainees. Marco Giordano, the owner, laughed when staff complained and said they were oversensitive. Elena Park, the hostess, rolled her eyes but kept her head down. Luis Ramos, the head cook, shouted in the kitchen, and spectators learned to step around him instead of toward him. Each episode felt minor to some, but to Jasmine, they formed a pattern of power being exercised with impunity. There were whispered promises of tips that never arrived, suspicious cash adjustments at the end of the night, and a repeated request from Tom to meet alone after closing. Once he blocked her path on the stairs and said, "You know how this place works." And Jasmine, who had learned to keep her answers measured, said, "I know how to get paid for my work." The men laughed. She did not. The humiliation multiplied until one night it turned physical. The bathroom, usually a place of quick breath and lipstick touch-ups, became a scene of confrontation. Her phone in her pocket recorded the roughness of fingers, the metallic smell of the cleaning solution, the scrape of shoes against tile, the quiet thud of a slammed stall door, and the muffled music from the dining room. This is how little things gather momentum until they become undeniable. What he did not know was that Jasmine had been documenting every irregularity for months. She scanned cash reports on slow nights, she saved photocopies of timesheets that did not match the clock in the kitchen, she recorded private conversations about favors for people on the floor, and she kept a folder of receipts that did not add up. The device in her apron pocket was not an accident. The method was deliberate. Her notes included timestamps, names, and small contextual annotations. She would write, next to a receipt matched to an extra cash drawer, the name of the server who had worked that section and the shift manager on duty. She had learned basic chain of custody procedures from a friend in the courthouse lobby. She stored files in multiple places and emailed encrypted copies to an account she controlled. This preparation was not born of paranoia, it was born of experience. 3 years earlier, when she had reported an assault in college, the file disappeared, and the system found ways to let the abuser move on. She vowed that would not happen again. The evidence grew in quiet increments until the dossier felt like a book. In kitchen shifts, she smelled old smoke and grease that stuck to her clothes. She felt the fabric of unjust pressure against her shoulders, and she kept counting incidents like beads. When the bathroom incident happened, she did not hand the phone to the police immediately. She went home, transcribed time codes, backed up the files, and contacted a small circle she trusted. That moment of preparation turned a scene into a strategy.
Do not mistake the tension for isolation. Jasmine had allies, some visible and some hidden. Elena Park offered a bold text message. "If you need me to say anything, I will." Luis Ramos admitted he had seen cash discrepancies but feared losing his job, and then quietly left a photocopy of a ledger in Jasmine's locker. Olivia Grant, a local investigative reporter from the city paper, received an anonymous tip and made a discreet call. Detective Ruiz from the local police department had a reputation for listening when others did not. Captain Hayes, who oversaw the precinct, agreed to take the material seriously once the initial files arrived with what looked like a systematic pattern. Dr. Harper at the forensic lab confirmed that the audio files could be authenticated if the originals were preserved in chain of custody. Detective Chen, a federal liaison who had worked on cases of organized schemes, recognized the hallmarks of an abusive position and asked for more. Marco Giordano, the owner, tried initially to deflect with smiles and rehearsed apologies. Tom Reed bristled and told staff to delete anything they had taken. Vincent Bell, Jasmine's husband, did not.
Storm in wearing a leather jacket and shouting. He showed up at the restaurant, table by table, quietly asking questions, watching who avoided eye contact and who fidgeted. People call him a boss, but in Jasmine's life he was a protector who preferred to let her lead when she said she had the plan. Naming these people matters because corruption is never a single hand. It is a network of habits that protect each other and normalize impunity. The first time Jasmine and Olivia met face to face, the exchange was precise and tense, and it ran like this. Olivia: "You say you have recordings and receipts." Jasmine: "I have timestamps and copies. I have witnesses who will verify shifts." Olivia: "Why not go to the police first?" "Because there are names in those reports with influence. I wanted paper and backup before I stepped into that room." Olivia: "Do you trust me with your voice?" Jasmine: "I trust the byline when it protects sources." Olivia: "If this goes national, will you be ready?" Jasmine: "No one is ever ready. We will be ready." Olivia: "Have you told Vincent?" "He knows the basics. He told me to do what I needed to do and not to rush." "Okay, I will verify. I have a contact at the paper who can push the first piece." "Then be careful. For some of these people, reputation matters more than law. That means the story can become leverage. Then we will make it count." Each line was small, careful, full of pauses that suggested the possibility of danger. The conversation held smell of coffee in a back room, the tactile scrape of paper on a table, the whisper of tires outside, the cool air from the vent, and the faint metallic taste of nerves. These sensory details anchored the negotiation in reality. This exchange set up the collaboration that would turn private discomfort into public evidence. The moment the Allied forces moved was also a carefully staged turn. The call from Detective Chen came on a rainy morning. He said, "We need originals and a sworn statement." Jasmine replied, "I will come by the precinct with everything." Detective Chen: "Bring any witnesses willing to testify." Jasmine: "Elena can, and Louis will." Detective Chen: "We will coordinate with the prosecutor on a warrant." Jasmine: "Will you protect me from pushback?" Detective Chen: "We will make sure chain of custody is clear, and we will request assistance from the federal task force if needed." Detective Chen: "Do not post anything online. Let us control the narrative." "Understood. I am handing this to you." That short dialogue occurred with the hiss of rain against the window, the smell of damp coats, the sound of cars passing, the weight of a folder heavy in Jasmine's arms, and the metallic click of a pen signing a subpoena. For the first time, the small acts of documentation met institutional muscle. Involvement of a federal liaison raised the stakes and promised a prosecution that could reach beyond the restaurant and into a network of protected practices. We insert a brief pause here for you. If you are feeling anger or shock right now, know you are not alone. Many viewers ask how one person can face a culture that seems designed to protect abuses. What part of this story hit you the most? It could be the physical grab in a bathroom, the casual laughter that followed, or the way a name like Vincent Bell made others quiet.
Start your comment with the phrase, "What shocked me was," and then tell us which moment or detail stuck with you. If you have a similar experience, add, "I experienced this," and describe in one sentence so others can see patterns. Your comments help us understand where these stories resonate most and guide future episodes that focus on practical steps survivors can take to preserve evidence and find allies. We read selected comments at the end of episodes and sometimes invite commentators to speak with our researchers to help build resources. Now back to the timeline, as the dossier grew and authorities prepared to move. The dossier led to a legal flush that neither the owner nor the manager anticipated. A judge signed a search warrant after prosecutors reviewed the chain of custody affidavits and heard preliminary testimony from Detective Chen. The search, executed at dawn, arrived with officers in unmarked jackets, a team from the federal task force, and a court order. The kitchen door opened onto the smell of frying oil and stale service. Marco Giordano appeared in slippers and tried to close the door, but Captain Hayes read the warrant and told him he could not. Olivia Grant waited outside with a camera crew who filmed press releases after the seizure. In the back office, investigators located irregular cash ledgers, emailed lists showing instructions to alter receipts, and messages that suggested the owner had connections willing to exert pressure on local unions. The forensic lab cataloged audio files from Jasmine's phone, metadata intact, and Dr. Harper provided an expert report that matched voices from the recordings. Tom Reed was brought in for questioning and initially insisted the recordings were doctored. The exchange in the interview room became a longer, documented duel. Tom Reed: "I was joking." Detective Ruiz: "The recording is clear." Tom Reed: "If you play a sentence out of context, anyone can look bad." Detective Chen: "We will examine the chain of custody. You will have an attorney." Tom Reed: "I want my lawyer present." Detective Ruiz: "We will arrange that. For now, your statements are recorded." The room smelled of stale coffee, the leather of chairs tightened with the exertion of lawyers preparing for defense, the sharp click of a recorder, the faint fluorescent hum, and the metallic tang of tension. This was the public turn, the point where private documentation forced an interrogation.
Institutional response and the word corruption moved from gossip into legal terms. The legal climax did not happen overnight. It was a slow crescendo of filings, grand jury subpoenas, and an eventual indictment that named 14 people connected to the restaurant and several shell entities that funneled unreported cash. The prosecutors used terms like chain of custody and defalation and proved how the receipts had been manipulated to pay off patrons and conceal payments to men who claimed influence. The arraignments were covered in the press, and the public learned the vocabulary that turns rumor into law. Tom Reed faced charges that included assault and obstruction of justice. Marco Giordano faced charges related to embezzlement and creating a corporate structure intended to mask illicit payments. The court process included protective orders for witnesses, witness relocation options, and plea negotiations for lower-level staff who agreed to cooperate. Judge Morrison, presiding over the case, emphasized the need for integrity in public spaces and the protection of employees from retaliation. The plea bargains began to shift the network. Some defendants accepted sentences and cooperated, which led to information that implicated others. The word sentence moved from possibility to reality as the evidence table filled with documents, timestamps, and a clear audio timeline that matched conflicting staff schedules. The prosecution presented the files in meticulous fashion, and the jury, after days of deliberation, found key defendants guilty. The courtroom felt cold, the sound of the gavel final, and the scent of paper heavy, like ink washed in public light. There were tears from some staff and stoic faces from others. The legal system had finally begun to impose consequences on a pattern of normalized impunity. The fall of those at the top had immediate personal consequences. Tom Reed was escorted out in handcuffs, his jacket crumpled and his phone inactive. Marco Giordano surrendered his license to operate multiple venues. Luis Ramos, who had initially feared reprisal, found a steady job at a different kitchen and testified publicly about the pressure he had felt. Elena Park took a leave and then found work with a nonprofit that supported service industry workers.
Vincent Bell faced scrutiny given public associations. He met with federal investigators and provided testimony that helped contextualize how influence was sometimes used as a shield. For Jasmine, the change was seismic and complex. She received apologies that were public and conditional, offers of counsel, and requests for interviews. She also received death threats, and for a short time, she and Vincent lived with increased security measures while investigators ensured her safety. The restaurant staff split into those who cooperated and those who resisted. Friends and family debated loyalty and pragmatism. Some patrons who had once praised the cozy atmosphere expressed surprise, saying they had no idea what happened behind scenes. The city felt the ripple in different neighborhoods, from other restaurants reviewing their payroll practices to unions asking for clear reporting. Repercussions moved beyond the indicted individuals and forced conversations about how power is exercised in everyday institutions. 1 month after the raid, the community began to show signs of institutional change. The city council held a hearing on workplace protections and invited Jasmine to speak. She stood at the podium and read from the folder she had carried for months. Marcus Delaney, a council member, introduced emergency measures requiring third-party audits for establishments above a certain size and improved whistleblower protections for service industry workers. The local press, led by Olivia Grant, series of reports put pressure on occupational licensing boards, which then announced reviews of their oversight procedures. Several high-profile donors withdrew support from the owners' associated charities, and a foundation offered grants to train low-wage workers in documentation and digital preservation of evidence. The restaurant where it happened closed temporarily and reopened under new management after a period of receivership. The prosecutor's office announced a coordinated task force that included federal agents to monitor similar complaints. Jasmine received a small community award, and organizations reached out offering counseling and legal aid. The initial press coverage translated into broader policy discussions and a quick set of changes that seemed responsive. The city's hotline for reporting workplace abuse recorded a spike in calls, showing that when one person's story is validated, others feel safer to come forward. The month showed that evidence, when preserved, can trigger institutional shifts that protect others. 6 months later, the legacy of that bathroom confrontation had become more durable. New municipal ordinances required transparent payroll audits, mandatory staff training on consent and harassment for all licensed establishments, and easier avenues to report irregularities without fear of retaliation. An independent watchdog group, formed by a coalition of nonprofits and former prosecutors, launched a training institute that taught workers how to document incidents, secure chain of custody for digital files, and navigate interactions with law enforcement and journalists. Jasmine partnered with that institute to lead workshops and to help draft a guide for frontline workers. The case inspired national coverage that compared similar incidents across several cities and prompted universities to include modules on workplace documentation in hospitality programs. The defendants who took plea deals served sentences, and some restitution funds went to victims. Vincent Bell chose to step back from public association and worked privately to support Jasmine's advocacy. The final sentencing included remarks about deterrence and the need to restore trust. The lasting image we leave you with is simple: a small device in a pocket, a decision to say no, and the disciplined persistence to document turned a moment of humiliation into a precedent for accountability. She was underestimated by design and by bias. Today, her work helped change laws and lives. If this episode moved you, subscribe for more cases where evidence meets resolve and ordinary people turn indignity into reform. Share this story if you believe documentation can be an equalizer, and tell someone about the steps frontline workers can take to protect themselves. Humiliation
May win the moment, but documenting it can win justice forever.